a minute before we dive in to the sermon. And this, honestly, it goes hand in hand with what we've been doing and what we've been talking about. This idea of rewind, because this weekend leads into a very special holiday here in America, one that we tend to, if we're not careful, overlook. And if we're not careful, it loses its importance. We celebrate something somewhat similar to it called Veterans Day. But this weekend is something drastically different. Tomorrow is a day that we celebrate called Memorial Day. And say, well, why does it fit in with what the series is about? Well, Memorial Day gives us an opportunity, if we'll take it, to rewind. A lot of people look at it as a 3-day weekend for hamburgers, hot dogs, beach trips, pool, spending days around the pool, and all of those things are great. But if we don't stop to actually rewind and remember why we have Memorial Day, it loses all of its power. Memorial Day is a day that we get to set aside, that we can take time to stop and remember those who gave their life, serving this country, protecting the freedoms that we have, guarding everything that we hold dear, protecting our rights, protecting all the things that we have, all the things that we get to do, being here in a place like this, being able to have freedom of speech, freedom to be able to worship the way that we want to, freedom to be able to even be able to disagree with each other. People died to protect those freedoms. And if we're not careful, we begin to take those things for granted. And so what I would like to do before we dive into the service, before we dive into the rest of the service, is I'd like for us to take just a few moments and just be silent in honor and in memory of those who paid the ultimate sacrifice for our country. Father, as we take time this morning to just be still and just to be quiet, Father, I pray that we will honestly take time to stop and remember those who gave their lives to guard and protect the freedoms that we enjoy here in our country. Father, I pray for the families of those who have lost their lives, especially those who have lost loved ones within the last year or 2 years. Father, because that pain, it's still fresh. But Father, I pray that you would wrap your arms around them and comfort them this morning. I pray that they will know that there are people praying for them and that are remembering their loved ones. Father, I pray that, God, that we would never forget their sacrifices, that we as Americans would honor their sacrifice by being the best version of America that we can be. Father, I thank you again for everything that you do. I thank you for who you are. Father, I pray that in these next few minutes as we dive into your word, Father, I pray that you would speak. I pray that you would open our ears to hear you. The things that are fighting to distract us, I pray that you would push those things away so that we can focus on you and on your Holy Spirit and on your presence and how both of those things can draw us closer to you and make us more like you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I've said this every week, and I say it again today. Like it's so important for us to rewind. It's important for us to stop and think back. A lot of times when we rewind in a movie or a TV show or in a book, it's because we want to make sure that we heard what we heard correctly. We want to make sure that we saw what we saw correctly. We want to make sure that we understood what we thought we understood. When it comes to our faith, the reason it's so important is because over time, and it's just the way that our culture has become, especially in our church culture. People like me sit up on a platform like this, or they stand behind a podium or whatever, and you rely on tell you what the Bible says. You rely on us to tell you what God is wanting to say to you. But here's the problem with that. When you rely just solely on somebody like me, you genuinely are limiting how much God is saying to you. You say, well, that doesn't make sense. No, you really are. Because what happens is this: you rely on what somebody like me says, and then you go home and you immediately think, well, I've heard from God for the week, and so you don't really do much with it. And you start to lock onto things and you hang on to them and you base them as deeply held beliefs that you hold in your core. And some of those things aren't always based on biblical truth. They're based on opinions. They're based on preferences. And so when it comes to our faith, we have to rewind so that we know why we believe what we believe and what it is that we actually believe. We have to do the same thing. We have to say, am I sure that I heard that right? Did I really hear him say that? Why do I believe it? Did the Bible actually say that? Did that actually really happen in the Bible? Is that really what God was trying to say? Is that really what Jesus was teaching? Is that really what the apostles taught? And it's really one of the best practices you can get into, and it's something that over the last 15 years has really molded and shaped me. There's a lot of things that I used to believe that I realize now were not biblically accurate. Because when you start pulling apart the Bible and you start really diving into what the Word says and what God actually is saying, it gets inside of you and it changes you and it really alters, if you will allow it. Let me preface it with that. If you will allow it to get in under your skin, it can affect and change the way that you live your life. In week one, for those of you who are just coming in, I'm going to kind of get y'all caught up. In week one, we hit rewind and went all the way back to Exodus, where we see God's led the nation of Israel out of Egypt, out of captivity. And one of the first things he says, I am the Lord your God that led you out of Egypt. He very clearly differentiates himself from all the other gods that the Egyptians were worshiping. He says, I am the one who led you out. I am the one who spoke to you from the heavens. Said, I am God. And he says, so as a result, have no other gods before me. Because I am the only God that ever verbally spoke to you, have no other gods before me. But then we talked about this idea that after he set himself apart, it was less than 40 days. Less than 40 days, the Israelites began to replace him. The first place they came into contact with other gods, they started going, wow, that actually looks kind of cool. That looks interesting. And so they started replacing aspects of their culture and of their faith in God with other things. And we do the same thing. There are aspects of our life that we come to church and we do the things, we're like, God is amazing. He's the biggest. He's the greatest. He's the best thing since sliced rye bread. Or sourdough, French bread. Just pick your bread. Or maybe for you, it's the best thing since Holt's Donuts. But whatever that thing is we do that on Sunday morning, and then we leave and we begin to replace God with other things. And so we walked away from the first week, even though we're not carving something out of gold, we always reach this place where we have to understand that if God isn't first in your life, if he's not first in every aspect of who you are, what you are, how you live, then you've created an idol. Because anything that replaces God in your life has become an idol. And in week 2, we talked about this idea of love, and it just happened to be Mother's Day. We talked about this idea that we have a really big misunderstanding of what love is. Love for us is this emotional thing that drives us and pulls us closer to other people. And so when we see in Scripture where Jesus says, love your neighbor or love God, we lean into an emotional aspect of it. Well, I don't have an emotional attachment to my neighbor. Sometimes I don't even have an emotional connection to God. But it's not that emotional connection. When we talked about the idea that there are, the word that they use there in the original Greek in Deuteronomy, when we see God say, I am the Lord, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. The original word that's there, it relies on this idea that there is a presumed relationship there. It says, you have this relationship with God, so love God with everything you have. You have a relationship hopefully with the person that is your neighbor, so love them. And so we move from there, and then in the New Testament, we see Jesus come in, and he tells his followers, he says, as I have loved you, so are you now to love one another. disciples by the way that you love one another. And he uses the exact same word. And it ties into this thing. And we even went from there and we looked, okay, well, Jesus loved completely different. And we went back and we saw him wash the disciples' feet. And we realized that, okay, in order to love like Jesus, we have to understand that love begins where our ego ends. Let me say that again. Love begins where our ego ends. Because without humility, there can be no love. It just is impossible. It doesn't work. And then last week, we talked about this idea of misrepresentation. That in our lives, when we think of someone misrepresenting us, it becomes a legal matter. Well, someone steals our identity. We go in, we start filing lawsuit after lawsuit. We try to regain things. But for some reason, we have no problem as believers misrepresenting God. We talked about the idea where God, after he says, you'll have no other gods before me, he follows it up with saying, do not use the Lord's name in vain. And for us, we think of using God's name in vain because of our cultural aspects, everything that surfaced around. We've been so upset by someone saying GD or following even by saying Jesus Christ in a scenario. We think of it as cussing. We think of all that stuff. And some of you, when I said Jesus Christ, you got uncomfortable because you're like, oh my gosh, you're in church. You can't say that because you weren't actually talking about him. You were using his name in vain. You're right. But why do we get so much more upset about that than we do with actually saying God told us to do something that he didn't? That's where we left off. Jesus said, listen, don't be like them. Do not be like the hypocrites. Because I tell you the truth, they've already gotten their reward in full. See, when we misrepresent Jesus, it's its own reward. When we misrepresent God in our life, when we say, well, God told me to tell you, or God wants you to this, or God is wanting me to do this, and it's not actually what God is wanting you to do, it's all for boosting yourself, that's all you're going to get. You're not going to get a pat on the back from God. And for this week, I wanted to kind of bridge a gap a little bit between these two things, because where we left off last week and where we're going to end up this week, they really kind of go hand in hand. So I guess you could kind of call it a misrepresentation A and B. I was taught a long time ago that when it comes to other people, our reputation is key. Our reputation is everything when it comes to other people. When they see us, what they think of us, what comes to their mind is unbelievably important. A.W. Tozer, when he was talking about a person's reputation, one of my favorite quotes from him, he says that what comes to a person's mind when they think about God is the most important thing about that person. And it ties in directly to something that was spoken by the apostles in the book of Acts, where they said, listen, we can't do all of these things. We have all of these things that are needing to be done. So what we want you to do is we want you to select some men. And the first thing that they listed in their requirements was of good repute. Men of good reputation, men who people see and hold in high esteem. Not because of any reason, but because they are solid people. They do everything. Because our reputation is how people determine our trustworthiness and whether or not they want anything to do with us. How many of you guys remember a TV show that started back in the 90s called Survivor? Anybody? Anybody ever watch it? We've become slightly addicted to it in our home. But what makes us laugh is all of the people in this show that will backbite and they will twist and they will scheme and they will connive, all in the purpose of trying to get as far as they can in the game. But what happens then is they end up, at some point, they come back and they have to stab somebody in the back. And from that moment on, their entire shot in the game is ruined. When people look at us, they determine how close they're going to get, how deep they're going to let us into their life based on our reputation. If you have a reputation as someone who is a backbiter and a gossip, you're not going to get very deep into somebody's life. It's just the way that it is. So because of all of that, one of the things that Raquel and I have done with our girls since they were little, every time they leave the house, if we're not with them, when they go off with their friends or they go off even with their grandparents, we always say one phrase. Remember who you are and whose you are. Every single time. remember who you are and whose you are. And part of that is kind of a selfish reason, because how they act in public, the way they speak, the way they behave themselves, if they go out and act a complete fool, if they go out and break every law they possibly can, it reflects on us as parents. And it affects our reputation. It will affect theirs for sure, but how people think about us will be directly determined by how they act. And if we're honest, it would do good for all of us to remember that. Remember who you are and whose you are. We've got to reach a place where we start to remember that what we do, what we say, and how we act as believers is a direct representation of Jesus. I'm just going to let that sit heavy in the room for a second. Because some of y'all, we look at, hey, we look at Acts chapter 2 where Jesus says, okay, you will be my witnesses to Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and the rest of the world. And we think about the verbal going to people and sharing our faith. But very rarely do we stop and think about every other aspect of how we present ourselves to the world. We don't think about our actions. We don't think about how we react to different situations. We don't think about all of those things. But the truth is every single time we open our mouths to people who know that we're believers, and it should be obvious. I'm going to go ahead and say that. It should be absolutely painfully obvious to anyone you come in contact with that you are a believer, that you are a disciple of Jesus. Because Jesus already said that people will know you're my disciples by the way that you love one another. So every single time we step out the doors of our house and we interact with people, it should be obvious to everybody we come in contact with that there is something different about us. And when they give us the opportunity to speak the name of Jesus into their life, everything that we do leading up to that is going to either be a good representation of Jesus or a bad representation in their eyes. When we're asked to follow concepts, okay, when Jesus lays things out and says, okay, here's what I want you to do, it's the exact same concept as Raquel and I looking at our kids and saying, remember who you are and whose you are. It's no different. It's the exact same thing. I say, well, it does sound a lot like last week, Tim. You're talking about misrepresentation and reputation. And yes, because they have to go hand in hand. Because when you misrepresent someone, especially someone that you say you love and you care about, it affects your reputation and theirs. But people aren't going to look at you and say, well, man, that Tim, boy, he sure is a piece of work. They're going to look at me and go, man, that Jesus that he supposedly serves, he ain't nothing if he's acting like that. This is where we find ourselves at in our world. And the thing is, in order to not misrepresent Jesus, we have to know what it looks like to actually represent Jesus. We have to actually dive in and understand, because there's so much in Scripture that we look at and we go, well, oh, I know what that means. We're good. No, a lot of it we really don't understand because we look at it through Western eyes and we don't actually look to see what the context is in the Scripture. We look at it and we grab pieces and we cherry pick what we like. And so we have to really understand. So let's rewind back a couple thousand years, okay? Big time machine. Okay? Jesus actually spent a really inordinate amount of time when he taught about what it looked like to represent him. Because he wanted people to understand what it was supposed to be. We see him say over and over and over again stuff like, hey, love each other the way that I love you. That's what it's going to look like to represent me. We see the humility in everything that he says. We see him fall in line with people that really didn't know any better than what they were doing, and he was humble and he leaned into those things. And we see him say one specific phrase over and over and over again, and it's found in one specific part of Scripture. And it's literally so much stuff that we would be here for a really long time if I was going to dive in verse by verse on this. So I'm not going to dive verse by verse in on this, but I do want us to understand what's really happening in this passage of Scripture. Okay? In this passage of Scripture, we see Jesus say this phrase, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." Very simple phrase, huge impact. Very small, very simple, but it dives into something that we really overlook because we don't really get what's happening. So let's rewind back and let's see what it all means, okay? He says this in an entire section of Scripture from Matthew chapter 5 all the way down to the end of Matthew chapter 7, and even just a little tiny bit over into chapter 8. And it's called the Sermon on the Mount. This happens very early in Jesus' ministry. We've seen the wedding at Cana. We've seen him step out on his own. We've seen him be tempted in the desert. He's already started calling his disciples, and he finds himself going through this position. He's gone all through Galilee, healing the sick and meeting needs, performing miracles. And then we get to the very beginning of Matthew chapter 5, and he shifts gears on everybody, okay? Matthew chapter 5, go ahead, I do want you to pull your Bible out and go there because I want you to see this, because this is the very beginning of where we misunderstand what's happening. Matthew chapter 5, starting in verse 1, says this. Matthew writes, and he says, "And seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain." Okay? This is where we get Sermon on the Mount from, because he's sitting on a mountain. And when he sat down, his disciples came to them, and he opened his mouth and taught them. This "them" is a very important four-letter word. From a grammatical standpoint, the "them" is not who we think it is. Most of us, our entire life, we've been taught, man, Jesus taught to this massive crowd in the Sermon on the Mount. He taught all these thousands of people, and the reason that we get there is because at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, we see the feeding of the 5,000. And so we see Jesus feed the 5,000, and we see the sermon, and we met Jesus. Man, the biggest miracle Jesus ever performed was that he spoke to over 5,000 people at one time without a PA system. Grammatically, that is not who he was speaking to. He was not speaking to the people that were there. He was not speaking to the crowds. He actually, it says, as soon as he saw the crowds, and he didn't ask the crowds to come in, he did this. And when he sat down, his disciples did what any good disciple would do. They came and they sat at the feet of the master, because they knew if he was sitting down, there was something that he was about to blow their minds with. He was about to shape and mold their understanding of who God was. They'd already seen him perform miracles, so this was nothing out of the norm for them. He sits down, and this is why this is so important, because if he's teaching to the crowd, all of these scriptures mean something different for humanity. But if he's sitting down speaking to his disciples, it's something even bigger. It changes the importance of what he's doing, because he's actually telling his disciples what it looks like for them to follow him, not what it looks like for the world to follow him. Now let me specify this too. Say, well, that's what we do when we witness. We make disciples. Do you realize that even his disciples were not what we would consider Christians? He hadn't died yet. They were following a teacher, not a savior. This is a completely different scenario than what we ever have thought about and what we've ever wanted to believe, because we've always seen the disciples as being the first Christians that Jesus ever taught. The reality is they're not Christians yet. They're literally disciples sitting at the foot of a rabbi, trying to understand his understanding of who God was. And so when he starts teaching, he goes through a ton of topics. He goes through the Beatitudes. The blessed are those who mourn. The blessed are the peacekeepers. The blessed are the meek. The blessed are, which in enough was enough to make their heads explode, because it was all paradoxical, contrary stuff. Well, how can I be, if I mourn, how in the world can I be considered blessed? Because I'm comforted. How does that make sense? How can the meek inherit the earth? How can a peacemaker How does a peacemaker, how does that work? He starts teaching these things, and he starts teaching them about being salt and light. And well, you know, what good is salt if it's lost its saltiness? How can it be made salty again? You know, you're like a candle up on a hilltop. You know, how can the light do any good if it's covered? He goes deeper into it, and you know, obviously we know there's Pharisees sitting around listening to what's happening. There's members of the Sanhedrin because they're trying to figure out what side he's on. And so Jesus, this is where he makes the statement, listen, I need you guys to understand, I didn't come to abolish the law. I came to fulfill the law. He starts laying out over and over and over, and then he gets into I need y'all to understand, like, if I'm here to fulfill the law, you've got to understand what the law really looks like and what it sounds like and how it actually works. And that's why he said, you've heard it said in days of old, but I tell you, because our understanding of what the law looked like was too shallow, it was too thin, it was too little. It didn't go deep enough. That's why he goes into don't murder, because I'm telling you the truth. Even if you insult somebody, you're guilty of murder in God's eyes. You've heard it said, don't lust after a woman, but I'm telling you the truth. Even if you look at her with lust in your heart, you're just as guilty as if you actually were an adulterer. He goes all the way in, and it's a big, huge topic that I still don't understand all completely, but he talks about, if you give someone a certificate of divorce, you cause them to become an adulterer. I don't understand the whole thing. I'm not going to get into that right now. That's a conversation for a Sunday night in discipleship times. But he gets in, don't swear an oath. Let your yes be yes and your no be no. Don't retaliate. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, give them also the left. If someone forces you to go a mile, go with them 2 miles. If they order you to give them your cloak, give them your tunic also. He goes in, don't retaliate. And then he switches gears. He says, I want you to love your enemies. And there's that word love again. If we go all the way back to week 2, what did we learn about love? It revolves around humility, and it cannot exist outside of relationship. So Jesus says, I need you to build a relationship with your enemies so that you can love them the way that I've loved you. Kind of heavy stuff right there. And then he says, okay, and then what I want you to do is if you give to the poor, if you're going to help somebody out, if you're going to do these things, help the needy, do it in secret. Don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. Don't shine a spotlight, because if you do, I tell you the truth, you've already gotten your reward. And then he takes it a step further and he says, and here's the thing, when you pray, don't be like them. Don't use flowery language trying to impress the Father, because all you're trying to do is impress the people with your words. Instead, go to your secret place. Go to the closet where my Father, who sees what's done in secret, will hear you. This doesn't sound like modern day believers, if I'm just being honest. And I can say that because I am one. He covers so much stuff. He dives all the way through so many different topics, and he goes so far into what it looks like to follow him and to understand what the law is actually saying. And part of that is because he wants them to understand, like, you can't even get the surface level stuff right, let alone the deep stuff underneath. Like, you can't even, you're doing great with the surface stuff, but some of you are still struggling with that, like the whole don't lie, don't steal, those things you're still struggling with. And if you can't even do that, here's what it actually looks like. He starts laying the foundation for why they need a Messiah, why they need a Savior to bring everything back around. They don't understand yet what's happening, but they're going to. But at the heart of all of this, he's giving just a massive snapshot. He's giving a massive overview of what it looks like to follow him. He gives this picture of why he would end up loving us the way that he did. Even the whole concept of, like, love your enemies. Like, do you realize that every single person on the face of the planet at that point was a sinner in the eyes of God, which put them diametrically opposed to Jesus? They were all enemies of God at that point because they were living a life of sin. So he was telling them, look, love each other the way that I loved you. You were my enemies, and I loved you. And I served you in secret. I didn't pray big prayers. Instead, I just went to my Father and said, I know what you're going to do. You know what you're going to do. I'm just saying this so that they'll know that you've sent me. And that was it. And even when he said, when you pray, pray like this: Our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. It was literally praying, God, you are big. You are everything that I'll ever need. You provide everything that I need. Please forgive me and help me to forgive those who persecute me the way that I've persecuted you. And that was it. Jesus takes the time to say, this is what it actually looks like. He even goes as far as saying, okay, a lot of people are going to come and they're going to say that they're from me. But I'm telling you the truth. Be wary of false prophets. And you'll know that they're false prophets by the fruit that they bear. What is being evidenced in their life? Because only a fig tree can grow figs. Only an apple tree can grow apples. You can't get grapes out of a pomegranate. It just doesn't work that way. Jesus starts laying this down and saying, this is what it ultimately looks like to walk with God. If someone comes to you and they say, God said this, but everything about them screams the opposite, they're a false teacher. They are a false prophet. And he finishes out the whole thing in Matthew chapter 7. Go ahead and flip over there. 2 chapters later. Matthew chapter 7, verse 24. And this is where it gets interesting. Matthew chapter 7, starting in verse 24. This is kind of what I picture happening here, okay? Jesus is still, I'm assuming he's still sitting. Maybe he stood up. Maybe he got a little bit fired up. We don't know. We don't know if he was an old-time Baptist revival preacher. We don't know. But what we do know is that Jesus, in verse 24 here in chapter 7, he stops. He ends his sermon with these phrases. Everyone who hears these words of mine and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat on the house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell, the floods came, the winds blew and beat against the house, and it fell, and great was the fall of it. Okay? This is what I love about this. This is the end of Jesus' lecture. And he basically ends it by saying, remember who you are and whose you are. These ideas are in direct opposition to what the people believed about God. The things that Jesus taught didn't make sense to a lot of people at the beginning because their understanding of who God was skewed. And the reason it was skewed was simply because of misrepresentation. And it shifted God's reputation in the mind of the people. Jesus, as you've heard it said, those were man's attempt to wrap their head around God. They were the bare minimum because God is so much bigger than we could ever fully wrap our heads around. These moments were the people saying, okay, don't steal, don't kill. I don't really know how deep it really goes, so we're going to create other things in along with it to kind of make it work. But just don't end somebody's life. But Jesus comes back in and he says, listen, if you really want to absorb who thy Father is, if you really want to understand his heart and understand what his standard is, this is what it looks like. Because your understanding will always fall short. And he had to shift the thinking. He had to. Because without shifting the thinking, the misrepresentation of who God was would continue. And it would follow the whole way through. The entire reason that Jesus said, well, the first and greatest commandment is to love the Lord your God with all of your heart, your mind, and your soul. And the second is like it, to love your neighbor as yourself. Is because if you do those two things, everything else just happens naturally. If you do those two things, if you put God first and you love him with everything that you have because you have a relationship with him, it can't help but bleed over into the relationships that you have with the people around you. There's just no way around it. Now, and this is what's amazing to me, okay? We say Jesus taught to the entire crowd, and in a way he did. But his primary goal was to teach to the disciples. That's where the intention was. He was teaching the disciples what it actually looks like to walk with the God that they had been misled about. We have no idea how close anybody else was. So at the end, when Jesus speaks up and he says, hey, everyone who hears these words of mine and does them, in that moment, the focus shifts from just being about the disciples to the crowd as a whole. And saying, I know some of you are sitting out there and you've just been hearing bits and pieces, but I want you to understand, any one of you who hears these words of mine and does them is like a man who builds his house on a rock. Because you have a solid foundation for when storms come. And any one of you who hears this and chooses to ignore it, you're like a foolish man who builds your house in sand. See, his followers were there. They needed to learn first because they were going to be the ones who would ultimately start to represent him in the world. As soon as he left, they were going to be the ones that he said, listen, here's the new mission. The mission before was for me to come and build a relationship with you guys so that when I died for your sins, there would be a way to my Father. But the mission is going to change now because you are going to be my witnesses, starting in Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria and the ends of the earth. In our lives, in our world, we are going to face scenarios where we're going to be tempted to react and respond in the way that we've always heard. But Jesus says, I'm telling you this. So what does that mean in a nutshell? Well, it's simply this. Our responses to the people we come in contact with, our interactions with them should always point back to Jesus. Our response in every scenario we find ourselves in, every situation, every moment when things are going right, when things are going wrong, when we're overwhelmed, when we just want to give up, our response should always point back to Jesus. Every single time. And the reason for that, okay? We represent a holy God. We are his witnesses, but we are also his children. When we're confronted, persecuted, whatever you want to call it, because not every confrontation is persecution, okay? But when we're confronted, we should lean into love. When we're belittled, we should lean into love. When we find ourselves questioned, we should lean into love. Because it was the love of Jesus and his kindness that drew people in. How we represent him not only affects our witness, but his reputation. When we react like the world, it makes us no different than them. And here's why, and again, misrepresentation and affecting the reputation of Jesus is such a big deal because when we are walking out into our day, into our world, we're carrying the name of Jesus with Jesus carried the name of the Father into a scenario where he sat with his closest friends and shared with them about the Father. There were thousands that were sitting around that were not directly part of the conversation, but heard. Every single day, every single time that you walk out of your house, every conversation you have, you may be sitting at lunch with me, and we may be talking about Jesus. We may be talking about the Braves. But whatever that conversation, there are people sitting around, and they're listening. They're watching our behavior. One of my favorite stories of being a parent. You have those moments where you're like, this is too good to pass up. We happened to be, I believe it was in JCPenney's. And we were walking, and Nevaeh was really little at this point. And this little kid, not Nevaeh, this other kid, I don't know what was going on, but this kid was not happy. This kid was screaming at his mom. Mom's like having to drag him down the aisle because he won't put his feet under him. And we just looked at Nevaeh because she was like, she'd never seen anything like that before. Made her super uncomfortable. And we just looked at her and said, you see that? And she's like, don't be that. And so what would happen is if she ever happened to start kind of moving in that direction, which, listen, she was over here, that kid was like on the other side of the fellowship hall from how her behavior is, okay? But if we ever saw her start creeping that way, remember that little boy. And she would snap up. And here's the reason why, because she watched somebody that was a poor representation of how they should act and behave. And she didn't want anything to do with it. As believers, we are watched constantly. People will watch you, especially if you're walking around with, and I hate to say this, but if you're walking around with a Sweetwater t-shirt on, you're a representation of us. You're a representation of me. Because people in this town know that I'm the pastor here. And so if you're walking around with a Sweetwater t-shirt and you act a fool in a restaurant or somewhere wearing that shirt and they go, man, don't go to Sweetwater, them people are nuts. Their pastor must be something. But if you're wearing a Christian t-shirt, if you have a Jesus fish on your car, if you have a Jesus is my co-pilot sticker, and you cut somebody off, you blow the horn at them, you give them the one-finger salute out in traffic, they're going to look at you and go, well, some kind of Christian they are. You ruin God's reputation anytime that your response does not lead back towards Jesus. We have to point back to Jesus. And this is something, and I've already said it, but Jesus reiterates it so perfectly before he dies. And in John 13:35, by all this, will people know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. And just before this, when he said, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you. He says up front, people will know that you're my disciples because you will match my reputation. If we as believers are not matching the reputation that Jesus himself left, then we are in the wrong. We are sinning. And we need to come back to our Savior. Say, well, but you don't understand my people. No, I do understand I understand your people because I have some of those same people. Well, my people don't want to hear about Jesus. Fine, don't talk about Jesus. Show them Jesus. Let them see Jesus in you every time you open your mouth, every time you turn on, every time you're with them. Show them Jesus. Because when we actually showed, and this is what I love about this picture of the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus sits down, first thing that happens is his followers come around him. His closest circle gathers around. And then other people continue to come up and creep in to listen. When our lives point back to Jesus, people come and they lean in to hear what we have to say. When was the last time that your life was so full of giving Jesus as an example that people were beating your doors down to hear what you had to say? Odds are, it's been a while. Because when we misrepresent his name, we're not showing people whose we are. can't bring those two things together and find who we are as a result of whose we are, then we'll miss the mark every time. Jesus said, if anyone will come after me, let him deny himself daily, take up his cross, and follow me. That means every single day that we wake up, we have to die to ourselves so that Jesus can stay alive inside of us. Because if we put anything in front of God, we've created an idol. And until we can remove that idol and love others the way that Jesus loved us with humility, we will constantly undermine his reputation and misrepresent him everywhere we go. And the only way we can get to that point is if we take time to rewind and go back to the heart of the Father. So here's my question for you. Like some of you are in here, you're like, why did I even have to hear that message? I'm not a believer. Well, that's fine. You don't have to be a believer. Not everybody that was there at the Sermon on the Mount was a believer. But what Jesus did say was, everyone who hears these words of mine and does it is like a man who built his house on a rock. Because they're solid. There's solid principles to base your life around, whether you're a Jesus follower or not. You build a life using those principles and things go well for you. If you're a believer in the room, we've got to go back. We've got to rewind our egos and put him first so that people will see him in us. With every song we sing, every conversation we have, every single time we wake up, every time we walk out the door of our house. When we strip everything about who we think we are away, will people see him or will they see you? This morning we're going to do things a little bit differently as we close down. Normally, I would say, I'm going to be up here if you need to talk, need to pray. This morning's invitation, for lack of a better term, this is not the normal, okay? Like, if you're here and you don't know Jesus, like, I need you to know this. Like, I would love for you to meet Jesus. I would love for you to see Jesus, but I'm going to be honest with you. I can't guarantee that the Jesus you've seen, even here, since you've been coming, is a good representation of Jesus. Because there's too much of us in the way. So if that's the case, like if you want to hear more about Jesus, by all means, come talk to me. I would love to talk to you about him and kind of help you uncover who he really is. But if you're a believer in this room, this time is for you, okay? We're going to do one last song. And I want you to listen to this song. And I want you to make this song your prayer. In fact, it's not a matter of me wanting you to make this song your prayer. In reality, I wholeheartedly believe that God wants this to be all of our prayers. Because until we let them see him in us, they'll never really know him. So in these next couple moments, I want you to sit and pray and just be honest with yourself and with God about where you are. Father, thank you so much for who you are. Thank you for loving us, for challenging us, for encouraging us to be more than what we are. Father, I pray in these next few minutes, these next few moments, that you'll reveal yourself to us in a way maybe that we just flat out forgot about. I pray that you'll peel the layers back. I pray that where we've been wrong, I pray that you'll forgive us. And I pray that you'll bring us back to that place where we originally met you. Bring yourself front and center for us again.